Hi, my name is Sabita, and I will be talking about the use of domesticity in the works of female artists within Western art. What does cleaning the floors and steps of a museum, showing off kitchen utensils, and turning the female body into a house have in common with the portrait of women reading on a sofa or drinking tea? Keep watching to find out. Now, let's start with a bit of historical background. During the Renaissance, women were represented confined in spaces that read as domestic. They're flattened and framed within domestic architecture. In this portrait of Giovanna Tornabuoni Albizzi, she is presented in profile, clad in expensive clothing, framed within the shelf on the background. The exemplary woman, sitting in the house, flat and lifeless. This difference in gendered representations is best exemplified in these paintings by the same artist. Compared to the man, the woman seems utterly lifeless with her flattened hair and facial features, while he gets to be amongst the outdoor landscape associated with the ships in the background. Notice that no part of her body bleeds out of the column on the edge of the painting. She is confined and contained within the house. Although the outdoor landscape does bleed into her background, she is instead associated with the book and the jewelry on the shelf. Hence, women during these time periods were literally represented as objects. There is little change in the representations of women after the Renaissance. Female bodies mostly appear as allegories or as nudes exposed for the pleasures of the assumed male viewers. There were only a handful of female artists working during these times, and they too were bound by cultural norms and visual traditions in representing the female figure. Women have been presented as small and flat and lifeless. The female body has always been represented in order for the male artist and audience to project their ideas onto. The structural and cultural confines have largely shut women within the domestic settings. Yet, in the limited space and freedom that they are given, female artists still make art that speaks to and of femininity and female identity. The domestic setting has been embraced and subverted by the female artists across centuries to examine issues of identity, oppression, and self-reflection. As the authors assert in Tuordo Theory of Visual Argument, context isn't just found in the image. Context also means cultural assumptions, situational cues, and time-sensitive information. To understand what these works are communicating, we must also be familiar with the time and culture in which they were created. Social structures did not allow for women to participate in the visual arts until fairly recently. Even today, there are countless hurdles that female artists have to work through and against. In Why Have There Been No Great Women Artists, Linda Nochlin claims that no matter how many new female artists we discover from the olden days, the reality is that there could never exist great female artists during these times because the social structures in place would never allow for the female artist to participate in the arts in the same way that men could. Nochlin is especially wary of the feminist scholars' need to, quote, discover and elevate female artists. To her, this would mean dismissing the blatant power imbalance and the lack of agency that women had in these times. This would also mean acknowledging and moving along with the definitions and criteria for quote-unquote greatness, which is shaped by patriarchy and will only ever include men. In Modernity and the Spaces of Femininity, Griselda Pollock problematizes the canon of modern art which only includes men as its initiators. She argues that this is because what modernist art history celebrates is a selective tradition which normalizes as the only modernism a particular and gendered set of practices. Female artists of modernity like Cassatt and Morisot, for example, did not have access to the brothels and other urban spaces of modern Paris, a favorite and popular subject among their male counterparts. They could not access a nude model that could be painted as an allegory for class relations. So instead, they painted their relatives and friends and domestic servants, mostly in very domestic or gendered settings, taking care of children or reading books or drinking tea. This theme of domesticity is recurring in works by female artists, It is most visibly manifested here in Louise Bourgeois' series of Femmes Maison, or Housewomen. While making this work in the 1940s, she was raising 3 children of her own. We can see this reflection of confinement and domestic labor in the works here, as the female body is literally turned into houses. These works had a huge impact on feminist arts of the 1960s and 70s. Similarly, when Euclid cleaned the floors and steps of museums in her 1973 performance work, and Rosler showed off kitchen utensils in her 1974 film, the artists explored the ways in which domestic labor is unpaid or underpaid, and these labors need to be thought of as equally oppressive as other forms of gendered and socioeconomic oppression. The reason these works by female artists are radical is because they are able to subvert domesticity, which was used to render women as objects, into a space and discourse to explore and analyze gendered oppression, power imbalance, and gendered identities. For too long, art history has been shaped by the experiences of the male artist and the reception of the supposed male viewer. By examining works by female artists, especially the ones that subvert long-standing art historical traditions, can we come to a deeper understanding of gender dynamics and power imbalance, not just in terms of art and art history, but the society more broadly.